I saw that he was white and trembling. Big drops of sweat stood out on his brow, his teeth chattered, and his hands shook. He had forgotten he carried a rifle. "That reminds me," said Frank. "They tell a story over at Kanab on a Dutchman named Schmidt. He was very fond of hunting, and I guess had pretty good success after deer and small game. One winter he was out on the Pink Cliffs with a Mormon named Schoonover, and they ran into a lammin' big grizzly track, fresh and wet. They trailed him to a clump of chaparral, and on going clear round it, found no tracks leadin' out. Schoonover said Schmidt commenced to sweat. They went back to the place where the trail led in, and there they were, great big silver-tipped tracks, bigger'n hoss tracks, so fresh that water was oozin' out of them. Schmidt said, 'Zeke, you go in and git him. I've took sick right now.'" Happy as we were over our chase of Old Tom, and our prospects, for Sounder, Jude, and Mose had seen a lion in a tree, we sought our blankets early. I lay watching the bright stars and listening to the roar of the wind in the pines. At intervals it lulled to a whisper, and then swelled to a roar, and then died away. Far off in the forest a coyote barked once. Time and time again, as I was gradually sinking into slumber, the sudden roar of the wind startled me. I imagined it was the crash of rolling weathered stone, and I saw again that huge, outspread flying lion above me. I awoke some time later to find Mose had sought the warmth of my side, and he lay so near my arm that I reached out and covered him with the end of the blanket I used to break the wind. It was very cold, and the time must have been very late, for the wind had died down, and I heard not a tinkle from the hobbled horses. The absence of the cowbell music gave me a sense of loneliness, for without it the silence of the great forest was a thing to be felt. This oppressiveness, however, was broken by a far distant cry, unlike any sound I had ever heard. Not sure of myself, I freed my ears from the blanketed hood and listened. It came again, a wild cry that made me think first of a lost child, and then of the mourning wolf of the north. It must have been a long distance off in the forest. An interval of some moments passed, then it peeked out again, nearer this time, and so human that it startled me. Mose raised his head and growled low in his throat, and sniffed the keen air. "Jones, Jones!" called, reaching over to touch the old hunter. He woke at once, with the clear-headedness of the light sleeper. "I heard the cry of some beast," I said, "and it was so weird, so strange. I want to know what it was." Such a long silence ensued that I began to despair of hearing the cry again, when, with a suddenness which straightened the hair on my head, a wailing shriek, exactly like a despairing woman might give in death agony, split the night silence. It seemed right on us. "Cougar! Cougar!" exclaimed Jones. "Oh, what's up?" queried Frank, awakened by the dogs. Their howling roused the rest of the party, and no doubt scared the cougar, for his womanish scream was not repeated. Then Jones got up and gathered his blankets in a roll. "Where are you using for now?" asked Frank sleepily. "I think that cougar just came up over the rim on a scouting hunt, and I'm going to go down to the head of the trail and stay there till morning. If he returns that way, I'll put him up a tree." With this he unchained Sounder and Don, and stalked off under the trees, looking like an Indian. Once the deep bay of Sounder rang out, Jones's sharp command followed, and then the familiar silence encompassed the forest and was broken no more. When I awoke, all was gray except toward the canyon, where the little bit of sky I saw through the pines glowed a delicate pink. I crawled out on the instant, got into my boots and coat, and kicked up the smoldering fire. Jim heard me and said, "Sure, you're up early." "I'm going to see the sunrise from the north rim of the Grand Canyon," I said, and knew when I spoke that very few men out of all the millions of travelers had ever seen this, probably the most surpassingly beautiful pageant in the world. At most, only a few geologists, scientists, perhaps an artist or two, and horse wranglers, hunters, and prospectors have ever reached the rim on the north side, and these men, crossing from Bright Angel or Mystic Spring trails on the south rim, seldom or never got beyond Powell's Plateau. The frost cracked under my boots like frail ice, and the bluebells peeked wanly from the white. When I reached the head of Clark's trail, it was just daylight, and there, under a pine, I found Jones rolled in his blankets, with Sounder and Mose asleep beside him. I turned without disturbing him, and went along the edge of the forest, but back a little distance from the rim wall. I saw deer off in the woods, and, tarrying, watched them throw up graceful heads and look and listen. The soft pink glow through the pines deepened to rose, and suddenly I caught a point of red fire. Then I hurried to the place I had named Singing Cliffs, and keeping my eyes fast on the stone beneath me, crawled out on the very furthest point, drew a long deep breath, and looked eastward. The awfulness of sudden death and the glory of heaven stunned me. The thing that had been mystery at twilight lay clear, pure, open, in the rosy hue of dawn. Out of the gates of the morning poured a light which glorified the palaces and pyramids, purged and purified the afternoon's inscrutable cliffs, swept away the shadows of the mesas, and bathed that broad, deep world of mighty mountains, stately spars of rock, sculptured cathedrals, and alabaster terraces in an artist's dream of color. A pearl from heaven had burst, flinging its heart of fire into this chasm. A stream of opal flowed out of the sun to touch each peak, mesa, dome, parapet, temple, and tower, cliff and cleft into the new-born life of another day. I sat here for a long time and knew that every second the scene changed, yet I could not tell how. I knew I sat high over a hole of broken, splintered, barren mountains. I knew I could see 100 miles of the length of it, and 18 miles of the width of it, and a mile of the depth of it, and the shafts and ray of rose light on a million glancing, many-hued surfaces at once. But that knowledge was no help to me. I repeated a lot of meaningless superlatives to myself, and I found words inadequate and superfluous. The spectacle was too elusive and too great. It was life and death, heaven and hell. I tried to call up former favored views of mountain and sea, so as to compare them with this, but the memory pictures refused to come, even with my eyes closed. Then I returned to camp with unsettled, troubled mind, and was silent, wondering at the strange feeling burning within me. Jones talked about a visitor of the night before, and said the trail near where he had slept showed only one cougar track, and that led down to the canyon. It had surely been made, he thought, by the beast we had heard. Jones signified his intention of chaining several of the hounds for the next few nights at the head of this trail, so if the cougar came up, they would scent him and let us know. From which it was evident that to chase a lion bound into the canyon and one bound out were two different things. The day passed lazily, with all of us resting on the warm, fragrant, pine-needled beds, or mending a rent in a coat, or working on some camp task impossible of commission on exciting days. About 4 o'clock I took my little rifle and walked off through the woods in the direction of the carcass where I had seen the gray wolf. Thinking it best to make a wide detour, so as to face the wind, I circled till I felt the breeze was favorable to my enterprise, and then cautiously approached the hollow where the dead horse lay. Indian fashion, I slipped from tree to tree, a mode of forest travel not without its fascination and effectiveness, till I reached the height of a knoll, beyond which I made sure was my objective point. On peeping out from behind the last pine, I found I had calculated pretty well, for there was the hollow, the big windfall with its round, starfish-shaped roots exposed to the bright sun, and near that the carcass. Sure enough, pulling hard at it was the gray white wolf I recognized as my loafer. But he presented an exceedingly difficult shot. Backing down the ridge, I found a little way to come up behind another tree, from which I soon shifted to a fallen pine. Over this I peeped. to get a splendid view of the wolf. He had stopped tugging at the horse